Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It's a lovely day here in suburban Chicago. I said good afternoon. It's still morning. I don't know why I said afternoon, but it is a lovely day either way. I'm heading home from the library, having just recorded the previous episode you listened to. Now I'm recording the next episode you're listening to. It's the magic of the radio. Well, this isn't really radio, is it? It's a podcast. The magic of podcasts. I've been thinking a lot about the size of my collection. I think I mentioned that I've been updating my collection catalog recently, and that means that my collection has ballooned a bit since the last time I did it. There was a fair number of games that had gone out that I had to remove, but then there were a fair number of games that had come in that I hadn't documented properly. So it was a thing. It was a fair amount of effort. But doing that made me think a little bit more, or made me want to talk with you a little bit more about some of the games I'm calling hangers-on. So I've mentioned before the shelf of opportunity, and the shelf of opportunity is, I use that term not out of some sort of silly affectation, right? The idea that, well, I don't want to be ashamed of my game, so I'm going to call it shelf of opportunity. I literally mean that's a big part of what attracts me about new games. I've said many times on this podcast that when I have the opportunity between playing a game I already know and playing a new game, I'm almost always going to pick the new game. I love experiencing a new game, seeing what it has to offer, even if ultimately it ends up not being as good as something I already had played before. That's just part of where I am and who I am. So from that regard, having new games available to me in my collection that I haven't played yet is literally an opportunity. It's a chance to play something new right at home, even if I don't need to go buy anything else right now. So the shelf of opportunity is just that for me. But I also have a bunch of games in my collection, quite a few in fact, more than is reasonable, that I've only played once or twice. I tried them, I thought they were good or whatever reason, and they're still in my collection. Because of course, if I thought they were bad, then they would go on the sale pile. Even if I thought they were just okay, they would probably go on the sale pile. Not always, but probably. Like an example is Egizia. I played that game, I think twice, and I decided that at the core of it is an operation that's just too mean for my taste. And I already have some games that are really mean, that if I feel like playing a mean game, I know I can play that. So it didn't make sense to keep this one in my collection. So it's in the sale pile. That's an example of what I'm talking about. So what I thought I would talk about today are the games that each time I decide, okay, I need to cull the collection, these are games that I look at and I think about, do I really need that? And I decide, yeah, I'm going to hang on to it. So they're games that seem like they should be on that bubble. Maybe I should have gotten rid of them already. But I'm going to talk about why I still haven't. These are the hangers-on. This is not that dissimilar from, in the past I've done episodes where I sort of put games on the chopping block. This is sort of like that, except these are games that I've kind of decided I want to keep. So they're not really on the chopping block in the same way, although literally every time I do a cull, I look at these games and I think about, is this a game I need? So here we go. First off, we've got Apocrypha, the adventure card game. This one is maybe the hardest one to hold on to because it's massive. So the obligation to get it played, or the obligation to experience it, is difficult. And it was very hard to play. You've heard that you can go listen to episodes where I talk about playing this game. It is rough to play. I have not found a lot of success in reading the rule book. Reading stuff online makes it harder, not easier, to understand what's going on. And ultimately, I gave up. But I feel like there's something really cool there. Some of the mechanisms that they have in play, the idea of this array of cards that you use to augment your dice rolls, the stories that are being built by the different sets of cards, this is all really interesting. And I love the potential of the story that's built into this game and the creepiness of what's going on, which is why I keep it around. I think someday I'm going to take the time to get this played, and it's going to be amazing. Because there are people who think it's amazing or think it's really good. And I want to be one of those people. This is hope in a box, even though it's a box about, terror and torment. That is Apocrypha, the adventure card game. Next up, we have a tiny Euro that I love the idea of, but I just haven't gotten played again, and this is Lemuria. Lemuria has a fun theme about being in a city where time is one of the elements that you can buy and sell. It's magical, and it's essentially a resource management worker placement game, or resource management tableau building game, where you have these tableau of houses that you're building, and those give you special powers which you use to manipulate the resource management piece at the middle of the board. Also, the game has a really small form factor. It comes in that sort of small eagle griffin sized box, which I find really cool. There's some sentimental value to it as well, because I got it at Origins 2017. I was one of they only had 50 copies there or something, and it was a long time before it was available anywhere. So I liked it for that reason as well, and I really liked the gameplay of it when we played it. I haven't made the effort to come bring it out again, but boy, I enjoyed that one. So that one's going to stay in my collection for a while at least, but it's interesting to sort of think about in the context of some of these other games, because it doesn't have all the flash or the pizzazz, but it's neat. That's Lemuria. Next up is one where I think the things you're doing in the game are a little on the pedestrian side, but the theme is really neat, and the action selection mechanism is fascinating. This is Noria. Noria is a game, I think the designer's name is Sophia Wagner, and in Noria you are, I don't know, there's some sort of floating civilization where you have these sky ships flying around, gathering resources. Ultimately, it's a resource management game. You're gathering resources, spending them to do stuff, and trying to stay ahead of people on these progress tracks. But what makes the game really neat is this action selection wheel, where you have these little discs, and you are placing the discs on the wheel and then turning the wheel. You get to choose from these paths on the wheel. It's a very fascinating system, and it's something I want to play again. And I feel like the potential of that system to be really neat and to allow for super interesting gameplay modes is well worth holding on to this game in my collection, even though I haven't gotten to play it again. And at this point, I would have to relearn it entirely. Nonetheless, it's a neat game, and I'm glad to have it. That's Noria from Sophia Wagner. Also, as a side, I bought that game at the Miniature Market store in St. Louis before they were bought by Asmodee. I don't know why that matters, but I did. Next up is Nexus Ops. Nexus Ops is a fascinating little combat game in which you have a faction of troops on a foreign planet, and you're deploying your troops strategic or tactically, trying to outwit and outmaneuver your opponents, and you get points by doing so. It's a fascinating game that involves a high degree of really aggressive combat, more confrontational than I usually enjoy, but because that's all the game is, I can sort of have fun with it. Same thing as Wildlands, right? That a game where all you're doing is fighting each other. I can shed my dislike of fighting each other because that's what we're doing. That's what the game's about. Honestly, the main reason I've held on to it is because it is tight. It is a really interesting game. It's really nicely made. The pieces are neat and the box design is cool. I like the art on it, but also it's out of print. So if I were to get rid of it and decide I want it again later, it'd be hard to get a hold of. And so for that reason, as much as anyone else, that one's a hanger on. That's Nexus Ops. From Fantasy Flight Games, actually. All right, the next one is another of those ones where it's the potential that I see as the really exciting aspect of this game, and this is Fortune and Glory. Now, obviously, I really like Flying Frog Productions games here. I don't have Conquest of Planet Earth or Shadows of Brimstone, but I do have A Touch of Evil, I do have Last Night on Earth, and I do have Fortune and Glory. Fortune and Glory is a kind of Indiana Jones style adventure game. You play adventurers seeking treasure around the globe, and you're going on these adventures and you're being chased by various nefarious villains. And one of the things that makes the game really neat is when you go into challenges, you will occasionally get these cliffhanger cards, and the cliffhanger card says and something bad happens, but then you don't resolve it, then your turn is over. And you stay hanging off the cliff, on the edge of the cliffhanger, until your turn comes around again. It's a really interesting little choice that makes for strong gameplay because you have this quirk of it's when it comes around again. I really like that. The gameplay is really long though, and like a lot of Flying Frog games, it depends a lot on how well you know the rules. If you know the rules really well, you can keep the game moving at a good clip. But if you don't, you have to look stuff up a lot, and it's difficult to look stuff up in their rule books. Their rule books are legendarily difficult to read. So, from that regard, Fortune and Glory is a game I keep because I see a lot of neat potential in it, but I haven't played it as much as I would like to have for having that potential. All right, the next one I want to talk about is a small box card game I backed on Kickstarter. This is one that goes in the category of like a game I really liked, but it doesn't seem like very many other people have liked it, and so I just haven't taken the time to get it out. It's a 2-player game called In Between, and it's sort of loosely inspired by the first season of Stranger Things. In this game, you play either the dark force trying to grab a town and pull the townsfolk into the upside down, or they call it the in-between, or you play the townsfolk trying to resist this evil force. And the way the game works is that you have a whole bunch of different locations, and you're sort of fighting over influence of the locations. You play these cards and add influence cubes to the different locations, and when you have control of one, it goes to your side. They all start in the light side, of course, but as the dark side pulls some over, it gains power, and it's an interesting back and forth struggle game. I really liked it when I played it. It's pretty simple. If anything, it probably suffers from it's not amazing, it's just good element, but the theme is so neat and the art is really cool that I haven't wanted to give it up yet. Again, it's also a really small Kickstarter game, so I doubt I'd ever see it again if I sold it or got rid of it. That's In Between. I have 2 left, or I guess I have 1 left, and then I've already mentioned the Shelf of Opportunity itself. There are lots of games on there that I suspect won't survive one play. That once I play them once, I'll be like, yeah, that was fine, and then it'll go. But the potential for a fun game that's connected to that one play, it's really a delight. So the last game that I'm going to offer, I almost didn't want to put it in the hangers on category because I certainly would not get rid of this game anytime soon. But it does fit the, man, you never play this game, why do you still have it? Question, which is Fury of Dracula. Fury of Dracula is an excellent hidden movement game tied up with the story of Dracula. Of course, it takes a really long time to play. That's why I never play it. Hidden movement is also challenging because you need a big group of people, and one person has to be the hidden movement person. Fury of Dracula is, like many Fantasy Flight titles, also pretty complicated in its execution. Nonetheless, all those things aside, it's a really interesting game of cat and mouse in which one person is the Dracula and the other person are the people hunting Dracula. And I will leave it to you, the listener, to decide which one is the cat and which ones are the mice, or vice versa. So that is Fury of Dracula, and that brings me to the end of my hangers on list. So what games do you have in your collection that you're hanging on to despite the fact that they probably ought to be sold or gotten rid of? Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and share your thoughts about that. I would love to hear which games are you keeping that you shouldn't. Otherwise, you can drop me a direct message. Wombat929 is my username on Board Game Geek, or you can send me an email, brendan@rattleboxgames. If you'd like to play an asynchronous game with me, I play on Boitaju, yukata.de, and Board Game Arena. In all 3 places, my username is Wombat929. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.